Welcome in, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the Competitive Advantage Talk sponsored by Kager, also known as Craft Analytics Group. As we get some more people filtering in, there's some extra seats, so please get seated quickly. My name is Carl McKay. I am a student at MIT Sloan. And as a fan myself, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today the following presentation. This is Reception Perception, using data to grade NFL wide receivers and predict breakouts. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, football analyst for Yahoo Sports and the creator of Reception Perception, Matt Harmon.
Thank you. All right. What's going on, everyone? Thank you for being here. As Carl said, Matt Harmon, Reception Perception, host a lot of podcasts, do a lot of writing for Yahoo Sports. So what we're going to talk about today is Reception Perception, how it got started, why I think it's important, and some of the goals here. So Reception Perception is the methodology that I created in 2013 to better evaluate wide receivers, isolate their performance from surrounding variables, and so forth. So Reception Perception origins here, just kind of again, why I started doing it. To me, when I wanted to get a job in the football space covering the NFL, I knew that I needed to stand out in an extremely crowded field. I mean, it was crowded in 2013. It's way more crowded now. So I'm lucky that I got started back then. So the goal then for me was, all right, I want to answer the biggest question that I have about the game. And for me, it was, what are wide receivers doing when they run off the screen on Sunday? And what I mean by that is, we know that wide receivers are dependent on outside variables in order to accrue production. Just as a quick example of that, a receiver is lucky if they get 8 to 10 targets in a given game. Like Jamar Chase led the NFL this year with 175 targets, just over 10 per game, but he ran upwards of 40 routes per game. So to me, I asked myself, why is nobody evaluating all those other plays? There's got to be a way to give the receiver credit for what's happening on those plays as opposed to just the ones where the ball goes their way. So my background actually in undergrad was working in social theory, kind of trying to quantify qualitative human interaction in social constructs. My original plan was to go back to school and get a PhD in that. I'm glad that life took me this direction into the football space for sure, but that's kind of, I use a lot of those same principles in my work now, which is there a way to quantify that qualitative reality of route running and the performance of players away from the ball? So the reason I think this is important is wide receivers are a premium position without premium analysis. As you can see on the chart here, wide receivers are a top 3 paid position now in the NFL. The league has decided that this is a premium position, but the problem there is that almost any stat, even the good stats like yards per route run, first downs per route run, stats I really like and quote often, do not isolate the wide receiver from outside variables. Because again, if you're going to get a target, a catch, a yard, a touchdown, the quarterback's got to throw you the ball. The offensive line's got to give that quarterback enough time. They've got to be used in the right way within the offensive ecosystem. So the goal of Reception Perception is to isolate the receiver from those surrounding variables. And what I do there is I go in and I watch the all-22 film. I chart every single route that they run, every snap where they line up, and try to quantify that performance. So the difference here is it's film-based data that I collect to kind of unpack positional specialization. I'm going to get into that later in the presentation about how receivers now, and this is really different than when I got started, the roles have expanded for these players. There's more roles available on a given team and different use case for these players. So really also the goal for me is to learn more about the game. I'm still learning after 11, 12 years of doing this. And it's really to give glory to the players because without the players, we don't have a game to talk about. And I mean, I got to have a real job, which no thanks. So get into the process of approach here for Reception Perception. Every year, I sample 60 to 70 players. That is both NFL players and prospects. So I'm not charting every single player from every single season. Most of the work is done in the off season on the prior year to try to project for the next season. Now, obviously, with that, some content framing is necessary. So for example, if I say that a prospect is a 10th percentile success rate versus man coverage in reception perception. That 10th percentile is not college prospect wide, it's simply in the players that I'm sampling. So again, some framing there is necessary when we're working with a sample of players. Every reception perception sample is 8 games. The reason for that is I'm one guy doing all this work, so I kind of wanted to see where a sample of games would be representative for a full year. For me, when I was back testing this before putting any content out, at 8 games is where it's sort of normalized for an entire representative season. So that's why it's 8 games for every single player when a player has played 8 games in a season. This is the data that I'm charting here for reception perception. There's a lot of different layers to it. First is route percentage. I'm charting how often a receiver runs each route on the tree. We've got Malik Neighbors here and his route chart from the rookie report this year. This is kind of what it looks like. I'll get into more of this later. So the main metric, though, that most people like and is, again, kind of the primary backbone of isolating the receiver is success rate versus coverage. How often are you getting open against man, zone, press, double coverage, and on each route on the tree? So, for example, here on this chart, Malik Neighbors was open on 73.7% of the routes that I charted for the in-season rookie report. There's also target data, pretty self-explanatory. How often were you targeted per route, catches per route, drop rate. And then there's contested catch data as well, contested targets, contested catches. Kind of my favorite one now, and this has evolved over the last 10 years, is in-space metrics, which is how often are you in the open field with an opportunity to break a tackle. Again, more simple than just yards after catch or yards after catch per reception. How often are you in the open field, catch the ball with an opportunity to break a tackle, and how often do you break one, multiple tackles, etc. And then alignment data, which we're going to unpack here in a second. This is snaps outside, in the slot, or on or off the line of scrimmage. And the reason this is so critical is because I've figured out over the last 11, 12 years, this is where everything has to start. You have to start with the alignment and the role of the player. So I have this up here. This is just a random play from the Eagles Super Bowl win over the Chiefs. We've got 4 players here. Number 1 on the bottom of the screen is Jahan Dotson. He's outside on the line of scrimmage. The guy above from him is Devontae Smith. He's in the slot off the line. Above the offensive line there, we have someone who's in the slot on the line of scrimmage, and then A.J. Brown up top is off the line of scrimmage and outside. So this is just an example of the 4 types of players I'm charting here. And when we get into alignment, that's going to matter. So next, again, why everything starts with alignment here, because analysis has to be framed within a player's role and archetype. My buddy Josh Norris, who works at Underdog Fantasy now, he says a wide receiver is not a wide receiver is not a wide receiver. And that could not be like a better way to talk about this, because just because these guys have WR next to their name doesn't mean that they are fulfilling the same role on even an individual team. So over the years in reception perception, and you guys are all smart in this room, you know this, if you're putting out like a data study, you probably want an expansive sample, right? Maybe 4, 5 years. For me, as someone that was trying to create content, it probably would have been pretty bad if in 2014, when I put out the first league-wide data for reception perception, I'm telling people, hey, I got a really good thing coming. Like, just wait 4 years, trust me on this. So I was making some forecasts and projections off the data that I was collecting that I probably wouldn't say now. And a big part of that was not taking into account this alignment data. So one thing I discovered, again, this is probably about 4 years into it, that if a receiver lines up outside and on the line of scrimmage, their reps against press and man coverage are going to go up. If the player lines up more in the slot and off the line of scrimmage, the reps against zone coverage are going to increase. So therefore, for these slot receivers or these flanker receivers outside off the line of scrimmage, your success rate versus zone coverage in reception perception matters more than your success rate versus man coverage. And vice versa, if you're that outside on the line of scrimmage player, we really want you to be a high-end press and man coverage beater. It's not that zone coverage success rate doesn't matter for these outside guys, but it's just what are you placing a premium on. So this example, I think, perfectly encapsulates this. This is the reception perception data from the 2018 season with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Juju Smith-Schuster was a second-year player at the time, and as you can see, this is all color-coded relative to reception perception historical data. So he was a higher inside and off the line of scrimmage player. So therefore, I don't care as much that he wasn't the best press coverage beater, which you see is like a 10th percentile number in the reception perception database at 38.2% success rate. I care a lot more that he was one of the best zone beaters that year at 84%. That metric matters for him more than the other two. So he was able to succeed and be a highly productive player that year despite that weakness in his game. And obviously, he had a larger career than that. You can, debate where he ranks, all this type of other stuff. But on the flip side, his teammate Antonio Brown was a primary outside on the line of scrimmage player. So the fact that he was one of the best press and man coverage beaters really mattered a lot more. And that's why these two were able to form such a great tandem. Even if, again, Juju had these specific weaknesses in his game, he was able to thrive in this given role. And again, when he expanded beyond that, there were some struggles in his career. But again, it's kind of, these two guys might as well be playing different positions given the roles, the routes, and the alignment that they had. Want to dig into the route charts here. Everybody's kind of favorite reception perception visual. This is from Puka Nakua's rookie season. The chart on the left is success rate by route. Again, this is how often he was open on each individual route type in the 8 games that I sampled. Green is above the RP average, the red is below, and yellow is within 2 percentage points of the average. So using this in conjunction with the route percentage chart, again, which is if it's green, he ran the route more often than the average sampled receiver, et cetera, et cetera. You can see that this is why he was able to go from being a 5th round pick into one of the most productive receivers in the league. This is just an example of a player that had a clear strength, running these routes that were in-breaking over the middle of the field, digs, slants, over 40% of his routes, and a coach that could put him in the right position and use him to his best abilities. He's obviously extremely good at getting open on these routes that work over the middle. Thanks to my work at Yahoo, I actually got to speak with Puka after the season, and without kind of showing him any of these graphics, I said, hey, what's your favorite route to run? What do you like to do? He immediately says, oh, the dig route is my favorite, like these in cuts off dagger concepts. As you can see, 21.3% of his routes were dig routes. Pretty good success rate as well. So I want to do a little game of guess who. If anybody can guess this player, you'll have my undying admiration here. So doing this in the lens of what are some questions that reception perception helps us answer. Number 1 is player talent. How good of a route runner is this wide receiver? Which routes does he excel, and what are his best attributes? So as we can see here, this mystery player, really good, again, on these in-breaking routes. Post-route success rate's really high. Dig route success rate at 87% was one of the highest sampled results from 2023. 82.5% success rate on slants, another really good result. So this is a guy who works really well over the middle of the field. If I'm just looking at this, I'm also thinking about deployment. What quarterback would he gel with? I'd guess that he gels with a quarterback who likes to work the middle of the field, likes to throw between the numbers, someone who works well with a player that kind of operates from the slot. This guy also, maybe not the best downfield receiver, 9 routes, corner routes, curl routes also. Maybe there's a slight weakness against man coverage, but he's a really good zone beater. This player, spoiler alert, has always been over 80% success rate versus zone. So again, we're probably thinking of a guy who's a slot receiver, a guy who works well against zone coverage, and he's an in-breaking route player. So any guesses as to this player? Yeah, up front. No, that's a good one, but very similar archetype. No. Yeah, it's Amon-Ra St. Brown from the Detroit Lions. So also, again, a question that reception perception can help us answer is this receiver capable of excelling if tasked with a greater workload? And again, St. Brown is a good example of this because in his rookie year, he kind of went off in the back half of the year. And, is this a fluke? Is it only because, certain players were not out there? But reception perception showed no, he can thrive in this big power slot receiver role, especially with the quarterback that he was paired with. But really good example of this as well, and probably, I've met some people this weekend who are reception perception subscribers. Shout out to you guys, thank you. And everybody's got a good story about okay, you helped me spot this breakout. RP helped me spot this breakout. That's obviously the best use and people's favorite use of the tool. And I want to kind of outline Nico Collins as an example of how this works and how I used reception perception results to spot this player. In his first 2 seasons, 2021, 2022, in 24 games, Nico Collins was under 500 yards receiving in both years, just 3 total touchdowns. Again, even the good metrics, 1.24 yards per route run, 1.68 yards per route run, it's fine. You don't look at that and say like, okay, this is the next big breakout receiver. However, in his reception perception data, especially in his in-season rookie report from 2021, he had he was clearly an X receiver. A lot of work outside on the line of scrimmage, as you can see. And that 68% success rate versus man and 71.9% success rate versus press. I'm like, man, this guy's got some kind of like T. Higgins to his game. At least those results were a little bit, again, high quality starting X receiver in the league. You think of that. But then in his second season, when he goes over to 71% success rate versus man and 74.5% success rate versus press, which is a 74th percentile mark at the time, that's really quality stuff. Like, I can give you all these correlations and relationships and causal data and all that stuff. Real quick and dirty way to look at it is, okay, you're an outside receiver, you're an X, and you beat man coverage over 70%, you're near that 75th percentile success rate versus press. We're interested in what you can do in the right offensive environment. So the Texans hire a new coaching staff, they draft C.J. Stroud, the offensive environment flips around, and the results are great. In Nico Collins' third season, almost 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. He was the second most efficient receiver in the league based on yards per route run. That breakout was you're able to see it in reception perception, even if, again, those stats that don't isolate him weren't really showing it. So this is mostly what people like RP for, is trying to spot these breakout players before you can kind of see it coming. So lessons learned from reception perception. One of the things I've definitely learned is that football is a beautiful game that I don't think is ever going to be fully solved, and being okay with that within the analysis is a big part of what I do. However, reception perception has given us a greater insight into the wide receiver position when it comes to isolated player performance, player archetypes, and just fit within an offensive ecosystem. The league is evolving, however. Again, when I was doing this in 13, 14, based on what's happening now, the league has changed. There's different defensive coverages, there's different roles for these players that are available. Just kind of quick example of this, this was something I was thinking about in the early 2024 season, as there's this whole conversation about too high coverages and all that. Are these players like Chris Godwin, Rashee Rice, Khalil Shakir? They're not, I like all those players at a varying level and everything, but they're not typically kind of some of the guys that I've maybe over-indexed on and been over-excited for, like the smaller route-running man coverage beating types who aren't useful after the catch. These sort of guys you can line up inside, beat zone coverage at a high level, but also get open quickly against man coverage and do something with the ball when it's in their hands after the catch. Maybe I start to put more of a premium on those types, and that's something I'm thinking about more as we get into prospect season here coming up. What's the future of reception perception? My goal is always just to expand the player pool of charted players every year, both in the draft and in the NFL, because I think the larger the data set is, I'm more bullish that our forecasts and predictions will be better. That is my number one goal, is chart as many players as possible. I love doing the work. I love being the one that does the work. So I hope to continue to do that. And while I don't ever plan to expand to chart other positions, despite the tight end bros constantly asking me for tight end charting data, I'm hoping to find other people who want to do that. We hired Derek Klassen a few years ago. He's now working with The Athletic, but he was charting quarterbacks for us. We have a new quarterback charter starting this year. I'm hoping to find other positional specialists that we can grow and expand at receptionperception.com and offer more data to subscribers. So reception perception, giving wide receivers the analysis that they deserve, and hopefully giving some readers and subscribers some good stuff to dive into as well. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thanks, Matt. You highlighted the RP numbers against man and press as indicators that someone like Nico Collins is going to break out. Obviously, those are indicators. They're not perfect. What's your intuition for what's happening when a young player shows those indicators, but then maybe doesn't become the next Nico Collins, doesn't break out? Is it all just situation, or is there any other like intuition you can share for when that happens?
No, it's a great question. And sometimes it is a bit of a delayed gratification, right? I think about Tyler Lockett's a good example of this, where he was just released by the Seahawks, so it's been on the mind lately. He had, at the time, the second best success rate versus man that I had charted for a rookie during that season. And again, it seemed like, okay, he's going to immediately be on that path. But then there were injuries, some offensive environment stuff. He had some other players around him, but mostly it was an injury situation. So sometimes there's that. Like, it does take a little bit of patience. I kind of joke sometimes, hey, you're never wrong, you're just early. But that's not true. Sometimes there are misses. And for that example, that's why other metrics there, like the in-space data, contested catch stuff, like, are there other weaknesses in their game besides the fact that they're a good separator against man that either are things that you can't work through or put a kind of a ceiling on the player, or does the deployment need to change, things like that. So it depends on a case-by-case basis, really.
Earlier you mentioned Puka running a dig route on a dagger concept. So how would you evaluate maybe the other part of the dagger concept with the vertical route that isn't necessarily supposed to even get open or won't get the ball, but it clears space for the other piece of the concept?
Yeah, it's a great question as well. And I mean, it's probably not going to be open, right? So it would not be like a successful route in terms of them getting separation. But that's just something where, like, I always say, hey, don't just look at the numbers, don't just look at the data. Like, this is part of the analysis, part of it too, and why I value being the one that charts the data and then presents it, because that's something I can say, like, yeah, this guy, his role for most of the, and I joke about it being like the sacrificial X receiver. Like, okay, this guy's role is just to sit out there and clear space for all the fun stuff that we're doing underneath. Hey, we're moving the guys around, motion at the snap, or we're moving him into the slot, things like that. So again, it's part of like being the one that does the charting and then the analysis there.
Hey, so just on the topic of like success rates for routes, something that I'm curious about in your methodology is a large part of what makes a route successful or unsuccessful is the communication with the quarterback. So I was wondering how you attribute responsibility through your process in terms of, like, if a receiver gets open but the quarterback throws the ball somewhere else and the play ends up being like an interception or something, and if there are situations where you, as someone watching the game tape, notice that a receiver is open but in the wrong place versus where he's supposed to be, given where everyone else is running on the route.
Yeah, this is also something, again, where you kind of have to admit what you do and don't know, right? Like, I don't know every player's responsibility. I can take a good guess based on, the years of doing this and kind of offensive systems and sort of the background of all of it, but I don't know every player's responsibility. I'm not in the room, which is why I'm also trying to not, like, slam players, right? I try to trend more positive than I do negative in my analysis, at least publicly facing, because I don't want to come out there and be like, yeah, this guy's never open or whatever, and he stinks. Like, I think that's like garbage analysis, really. So I'm trying to just work within what I do and don't know. And certainly when I'm charting this out, I would probably sit down with a player or a coach and be like, hey, you're wrong on this. And, like, I'm okay with that. I think in the aggregate, we're pointing in the right direction. But, like, yeah, specific micro examples, I'm sure there are times I miss things. And again, that's just part of admitting what you do and don't know.
Hey, Matt, thank you for the talk. I was curious, I don't know if you look at college players as well,
Yes.
going into the draft. So what do you think that NFL teams are missing in their evaluation of these players for people like Amon-Ra, Puka, who went in later rounds, that your data might show?
Yeah, I'll focus on Amon-Ra specifically because he fits into this group of players that I actually did a YouTube video on this last year talking about Keon Coleman, the receiver from Florida State, where if you look at these guys that have finished below the 35th percentile in success rate versus man and press coverage in college, almost all of the guys on the list, and I'm not going to unpack the entire list here, but almost all the guys on the list there that went on to be career successes, like St. Brown, like a Juju Smith-Schuster, like a Rashee Rice, all those guys, for the most part, in terms of they went on to be high volume impact players. There are some, sporadic deep threat types, the Will Fullers, Christian Watsons, things like that. But the vast majority of the players that became high volume guys went from the outside to the slot. And I think that's a tough thing where, and they're like the bigger slot receiver, the power slot receiver archetype that I talk about a lot. So sometimes, and there are teams that do this very well. Like, I think the Lions did this well kind of on the fly. That rookie season with St. Brown, he primarily started working as an outside receiver, and I noted this in the rookie report at the time. I was like, this is not the deployment I kind of want to see him have. But then when he really started going off in the back half, they kicked him inside of the slot and had him run a lot more of those layup routes. So I think this is the challenge for all of us, NFL teams and myself, is what are they doing in college versus like what could they be doing in the NFL and maximizing those players. So that's kind of just a concrete example of it. Now with the Keon Coleman example, right, where he was the highlight of the video, the Bills basically never did that. They never kicked him inside his rookie year. He was almost always their outside X receiver. So again, this is just my opinion versus others' opinion. I think that's part of what teams miss sometimes.
All right, let's do another round of applause for Matt Harmon, everybody. Thank you. I know there's some extra questions. Matt will be outside of this room just through the doors to answer them if you have them. So please meet him out there. We need to make room for the next CA.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.